Session number 8 of the Bebop Rewatch podcast, a podcast from Wulong Talks. Hi, my name's Jason. I'm the host of the show, as you know. And as always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, the Wrestling Kid, aka Rich Kid. Rich Kids is in the house. Say what's up, man.
What's happening, people? Good to see you. Or good to hear you. Or good for you to hear us. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's good to be back, man. Sorry we've kept you waiting for this. It's been a little while and, you know, the usual story. We've had shit to do, sorry. But we're back on the Bebop train, and we've got a great episode to talk to you all about, and hopefully you all have watched it as well, so you'll know what we're talking about when we start talking about it. But before we even get into that, we need to discuss some big breaking news that came out. For us over here in the UK, we found out about it this morning. For those of you based in America, you probably would have found out about it the evening before. And that is the news that Netflix, our dear friends Netflix, are going to be doing a live action adaptation of the greatest anime series of all time, Cowboy Bebop. Listen, man, I mean, to say we're excited probably doesn't even cut it, and I know Rich Kid's got some thoughts on this. But firstly, I'll just go into an article I found on The Hollywood Reporter, which gives a little bit of background detail behind the announcement. So the official article, as said, I found it here on The Hollywood Reporter, says that Netflix is heading to space with a new group of bounty hunters. That the streaming giant has handed out a 10-episode straight-to-series order for a live-action adaptation of the famed anime entry Cowboy Bebop. The series was previously set up at Amazon Studios and landed at Netflix after the former passed on it. Now, I didn't actually know that. I just assumed that it was the movie adaptation that had been floating around Hollywood for years. But apparently, according to The Hollywood Reporter, Amazon had an option for it as well. But obviously, they've passed on it. Based on the 1998 Japanese anime TV series from the writer Kane Kuga, Cowboy Bebop was a worldwide phenomenon and is widely considered one of the biggest series in the anime genre. The live-action take tells a jazz-inspired, genre-bending story of Spike Spiegel, Jet Black, Faye Valentine, and Radical Ed, a ragtag group of bounty hunters on the run from their past as they hunt down the solar system's most dangerous criminals. The Netflix series arrives as a live-action feature take starring Keanu Reeves has been tolling in development hell at Fox for nearly a decade. I'm sure it's longer than a decade.
Yeah, it's much longer than that.
It's much longer than that, because I remember hearing about it like pretty much, oh, God, when the series finished in 99. Yeah. Almost a year after that, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well. I mean, when did Looper come out? The film with Keanu Reeves. That's at least 5 years ago, right? If not more.
Looper was Ryan Johnson's Looper.
Yeah, Ryan Johnson's Looper.
Yeah, I think that's over 5 years ago for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so hold on, let's have a look. I'm just trying to get so we can give the audience a bit of a time frame as well. So Looper came out in 2012. My math isn't good. How many years is that?
I think we're talking about 6 years there.
So 6 years there, yeah? All right, yeah. Okay, yeah. So it's easily over a decade, Jay. You're not even joking about maybe even when it finished, because I remember them talking about the Bebop show or movie before Looper came out. So yeah, and that's 2006, and take into account when Bebop finished. But yeah, man, it's crazy. Like, you know, I've just taken over. Sorry, man. Continue, dear fellow.
You're gonna get your time, don't worry. But no, there's just like the article goes on to state a few more of the background details. So it tells who's involved. So apparently, the series is going to be a co-production between Netflix and Tomorrow Studios. With let's see who's involved here. Okay, so there's a couple of different showrunners. Someone called Andre Nemec, who I don't know. Josh Applebaum, I don't know. Jeff Pinker and Scott Rosenberg, I do know. They did a Disney TV series called High Fidelity. And they were behind that series that you liked, Everything Sucks.
Oh, yeah. That I knew I recognized the name. Yeah. That show, listen, guys, everyone listen out there listening, it's not Bebop related, but now it is kind of like that 6 degrees of separation, except it's not Kevin Bacon, it's Cowboy Bebop. Go and watch the show, Everything Sucks. It's a Netflix show that, just go and watch it.
Yeah, so they're going to be involved as the showrunners. And let's see, there's a couple of people from Sunrise Incorporated, which is the studio that did the original anime in Japan. There's a couple of people involved. Yasuo Miyakawa, Mayasuke Ozaki, and Shin Sasaki, who are all executives at Sunrise. They're going to be involved. Christopher Yost, who wrote For the Dark World and For Ragnarok, is going to write the first episode. And most importantly, above all of that, Shinichiro Watanabe, the creator of, co-creator of the series and who directed the original series as well, he's going to serve as a consultant on the live action take. So we don't really have a specific release date as yet for it, so I'm not sure when it actually is going into production. But presumably it would be some point at the beginning of the year. So I guess maybe we're looking at maybe early 2020 for when it goes online. So I'm thinking something along those lines is when it will happen. They have made an interesting note in the article as well, which is something that me and you were talking about a little bit earlier on, Rich, which is that the live-action Cowboy Bebop arrives as Netflix is making a massive push into the anime space with series including cult favorites, Neo Genesis Evangelion, and new shows including Seven Seeds, Ultraman, Seiya Knights of the Zodiac, and others in both the TV and film space. The streaming company has been heavily investing in this space as part of an ambitious push to build its subscriber base in Japan and with anime fans across the globe. So Cowboy Bebop joins the scripted roster at Tomorrow Studios that also includes TNT's take on Snowpiercer and Amazon's Hannah reboot. So there's quite a few, as we mentioned, quite a few kind of anime titles that are due to come out via Netflix over the next sort of year and 2 years. And as said, it looks, as the article says, they're really making a major push to kind of get into that side and that genre. And it's really interesting. I mean, I guess as the article speculates, maybe they're trying to appeal to Japanese audiences. And also obviously traditional fans of anime here in the West as well. So it makes sense, that they would be going after that market because the anime market seems to be one that's growing hugely at the moment. I mean, for those of you who listen to our regular Wulong Talks podcast on, we had a guest on in the last episode, Marquita, who's a big anime fan. And, she was talking a lot about how anime has kind of changed over the years and things like that. So it's interesting that they're really kind of pushing for this hard, Netflix. So yeah, we're going to get blessed, people. We're going to get a live action adaptation. But Rich, I know you're chomping at the bit, man. So what were your first thoughts when you heard this being announced? And are you optimistic? Are you skeptical? How do you feel about it?
See, I'm equal parts. I wouldn't say optimistic, like excited, jacked up. I can only imagine this is what it feels like in those, when you watch those films from the 80s, like where cocaine was like the main bad drug, and then the bad guys would do like a big long line and be like, whoa, and be like, feel like invincible, and be able to fight 10 guys and carry submachine guns. This is what that excitement feels like in hearing that I've got there's a Bebop show coming out, and then I've got like the other end of it where I just have this emptiness. I feel like Donnie Darko, that he knows his fate. He comes back and he's just like, let me just see if I can fix stuff. But no, do I really want to do this? Yeah, I'm just a teenager. I just want to sit in my room and just sulk. I have that type of dread inside me as well after hearing that there's going to be like a live adaptation. I mean, obviously, I'm not sure if the same studios are involved. The first thing that came into my head was Death Note live adaptation of an anime, and then I just went Death Note. I was like, yeah, like like I wasn't a fan of the Death Note TV show, but then from when I saw the trailer for the film adaptation, anyway, I was like, I'm definitely not going to watch this. And after hearing your reviews, Jay, I was like, yeah, you know what? There's something about animes that just shouldn't be made, because the ones that are made are like, you know, they're fantastic, they're brilliant, and but they just can't be translated to, like, you know, to live action. I don't think I've ever seen like a good adaptation, or maybe we have, but even if we have, it's just that one and we can't even remember it. We'd have to be reminded somewhat. But then at the same time, like you said, Jay, like this is something we've been waiting for years, and guys who are listening out here, you know, we hope that you're following us on this journey, you know, of the Bebop crew. But when you get to the end of this season or of this whole show, I'm not going to lie to you, there's going to be a small little space that's going to feel empty. And me and Jason have had that emptiness ever since this show ended, which is the reason why we kind of like rewatch it all the time. And we've always wanted that continue, like, you know, like a sequel, whether it be in like animated form again or like in like manga form. But in live action has been pretty much, yeah, we could do this. And after hearing people like Keanu Reeves were more involved at one point, and after seeing what he could do in The Matrix, this has been like a, you know, it's been, you know, one of our top wishes. But now I've heard it, I'm slightly scared. I'm scared they're going to mess it up, Jay. You know, I feel like this little rant I just went on, I feel like I'm lying on the couch and you're like my therapist.
Well, listeners, I mean, I went on at length last year about how much I despise that awful Death Note adaptation that Netflix gave us last year. You can go back and listen to the Wulong Talks podcast where we talk about that if you want to hear it, because I don't want to bring negative shit up right now. I want to be happy and just enjoy this incredible news that we've got about this Cowboy Bebop adaptation. So I am excited. Same as you, I guess I'm a little bit, you know, hesitant because of what's come before and how that's all played out. And, you know, you kind of build up a natural skepticism for these kind of things. But, you know, at the same time, it looks like they're bringing together good people. You know, there seems to be good talent involved in the production of this. It looks like Netflix are taking it very seriously. And I guess at this stage, that's kind of all we can hope for until we start to see, you know, more concrete stuff of what they're doing with regards to, you know, the stories they're going to tell and how they're going to tell them. Because I suppose at this point, we don't know if it's going to be a straight, you know, adaptation of the anime series, or whether they're going to try and bring maybe more original storyline elements into it and things like that. We don't really know at this point. So that all may play, you know, its part in how we receive the series when it comes out and how we react to it. But I suppose, you know, at this point, as a fan, I'm hyped, man. I'm ready to go. So yeah, we've been ready, man. We've been ready for this since like the series ended. You know what I mean? So yeah, we're getting what we wanted, so we might as well be happy for it while it's here. So yeah, listeners, I mean, let us know what you think about this development. I mean, are you excited? Are you anxious? Are you nonplussed either way? You know, let us know. We'll give you some information about how to contact us at the end of the pod, so make sure you're listening in for that. But yeah, let's move into this week's episode. So the episode we'll be covering is session 8. And it's called Waltz for Venus. Now, the previous episode that we had was, I think, fair to say, a bit of a filler-inner episode, which I think we kind of all agreed was a bit of a filler-inner episode. This one, in a way, you could kind of argue is as well, in the sense that it doesn't do much to kind of further, you know, the wider story elements that we've discussed in some of the other episodes that we've talked about previously. But at the same time, I felt like this one was a little bit more fun than the last one. I don't know. What do you think, Rich? I mean, did you find this one a bit more, as said, fun, I guess?
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. Episode? Yeah, no, yeah. This seems like quite high in spirits. even though it has moments where it's like it can get a bit dark, but which is something that we always say about the Bebop episodes, like it flips from one to another. But the majority of this episode is like really, really light-hearted, and it's almost like a day in a life where it's almost like at some points when they have nothing to do, like we feel like we have nothing to do, because the majority of the episodes there's always been something to do, and that kind of like lends itself to the lightheartedness of this episode as well. And it's quite character driven. You kind of get some characters explained a bit more, and it's almost like by spoon feeding us because of the way how it happens. But then it's at the same time, because it's so well written and because the story is so good, you just kind of you just go with it, and you don't really judge it too harshly because everything just works. But yeah, I love the tone of this episode, especially after the last one, man. This is a nice breath of fresh air.
For sure. So this episode starts off really, really well. It's a really kind of exciting opening. There's a bit of a cold opening, really, in the sense that it opens almost immediately into an action scene, really, where basically there you see this commercial space flight that's heading towards Venus. And the ship actually looks like an aeroplane, and the inside of it kind of looks like an aeroplane. So if you can imagine, for those of you who've flown and been on airplanes, if you can imagine what the inside of that looks like, then that's basically what this ship looks like. So basically, interstellar travel is the equivalent of getting on a Ryanair flight somewhere. Well, hopefully it's not the equivalent of getting on a Ryanair somewhere, because if it is, then boy, your baggage isn't going to make it to Venus. I'll tell you that for free. Yeah, and they'll probably charge you to use the toilet and whatnot. But anyway, so yeah, they're on a commercial flight that's going to Venus, or all of these passengers, and we find out that Spike and Faye are also on this flight as well. And the reason that they're there is because they're trying to capture some hijackers, some people who basically have a career, criminals, and who make a career out of hijacking commercial space flights. The criminals are called Huey, Louie, and Dewey. Boom, boom. So yeah, so I'm sure you'll all get that reference, but we'll go through all of that later. And then there's a really funny scene where I believe it's one of the hijackers says something to Spike. I can't remember what he said. What did he say, Rich, to Spike?
Was that the bit when we basically mean when Spike is sleeping?
Yeah.
He's just running his mouth.
Yeah,
I think he clearly doesn't know who he's talking to.
Yeah, and I get the. Correct me if I'm wrong again, because I may be making this up because I only saw the episode again like 2 weeks ago, so it's not quite fresh in the memory. But didn't Spike have like forgotten what they're called now, but the things you put over your eyes to sleep?
Oh, when you're sleeping, yeah, he's wearing that. Yeah.
Didn't he draw eyes on his?
Yeah.
So it looks like his eyes are So yeah, listeners, he's got again, sorry, the word escapes me, but you know what I'm talking about, the kind of thing you wear on an airline if you want to sleep during the day. Spike has got these over his eyes, and he's drawn eyes onto the outside of it, so it looks kind of like his eyes are open. And this person is basically shouting, one of these terrorists is shouting at him to I can't remember what it is now, whether it's to put his hands up or something like that, but basically to be compliant. And Spike is obviously not moving or responding because he's fast asleep at this point. And the hijacker's just kind of really going at it. And then the hijacker comes in close to try and accost Spike. Spike gets up and gives him like a headbutt in the chin without even trying, really, and knocks this guy out, and then pulls like his like blind things up and is like, what's going on? And then you get this really cool action sequence where Spike and Faye take out the remaining terrorists, and Faye has like this kind of stun gun thing that she uses to knock somebody out as well, which is pretty cool. Oh no, sorry, it's like a perfume, isn't it? So she sprays like the perfume and it knocks out it knocks out one of the terrorists, which was pretty cool and pretty fun as well. And I like that scene in terms of the way that it's put together. Like the fight scenes are just so well put together. We've said this many times so far since in the podcast series so far, but it really is amazing to watch, like kind of how they've the artists and the animators have managed to render these things well together. One thing I do need to look into is whether they used life models for the fight scenes, because it just seems like the accuracy of the intricacies of their movements are captured so well in these sequences that maybe they had people life models that they drew stills of and models of while performing. I don't know if that's true, but it's something worth looking up, I think. But yeah, that scene plays out brilliantly. And as I said, Spike and Faye do manage to capture this bounty, and they actually make some money for a change. So they get paid like 1.5 million wulongs, I think it is. Yeah. And then doesn't Faye run off to the casino immediately with her half of the money?
Well, number one, you've asked me, and number two, to all you listeners out there, if you've been watching this show, which you should have, you know she's run to the casino. That's rhetorical from Jason. We know where she goes.
Yeah, that's true. That was a silly question. Faye loves a casino, boy. So yeah, so Faye, I think, has run off with her money and gone. Now it turns out, sorry, I'm just taking a swig of water, listeners. It turns out that on this same flight that Spike and Faye had been on was another passenger who seemed to be kind of carrying something around with them, and we find out that the passenger's name is Rocco Bonaro. Yeah. Although it's weird because I don't know if you found this in your dub, but in my dub they kept calling him Rocco. Okay. Which was really weird because I was like, it's just Rocco. Like, surely Americans know people called Rocco. Like, that's just how you say the name, Rocco. Like, why are you calling him Rocco?
Americans call tomatoes.
Ah, yeah, true.
Number one. And they have Trump as a president. So, I mean,
yeah, Americans. Why are you changing up the language for, man? There's no need. But yeah, so Rocco is also on this flight, and he seems to be carrying something that is obviously of some kind of importance. Now, this is a common theme in Cowboy Bebop episodes. There's usually always some character who's got some MacGuffin, some kind of... And when I say a MacGuffin, what that means is it's a film term that Alfred Hitchcock came up with. And it's basically his way of describing a plot device, so something that kind of drives the plot of the story forward. So Rocco clearly has got something that he's trying to kind of hold on to for dear life. And as I said, when he kind of comes off the flight and he sees Spike again, he kind of gives the customer service person that he's talking to at the airport a load of jip, and then runs off to try and chase down Spike. He tries to kind of knock Spike over, but then Spike kind of moves to the side and he just falls over his own feet, which is kind of funny. And then when he gets up, Rocco kind of explains that basically he saw how Spike took out the terrorists and he wants, some kind of guidance from Spike. He basically wants to become a martial arts pupil of Spike because of how well Spike fights. And he does like some kind of, I don't know what it was, like he just was making a whole heap of noise and going, whoa! It's like, look, I could fight too, Spike. And it was just the weirdest kind of thing I'd ever seen. It was just hilarious as well, because it's so funny, because basically he's terrible at martial arts, listeners. And Spike is kind of like, oh my God, like not this. Like you could see Spike just really would rather be anywhere but having to talk to this guy at this particular point in time. But Spike eventually kind of gives in because Rocco keeps badgering him. So he's like, all right, I'll teach you some stuff outside. Now I love this bit outside, and it's a very important bit for explaining a lot about Spike's philosophy, and also the philosophy of somebody who would have posthumously celebrated their birthday this week as well. So, Rich, I'm going to hand it over to you. So if you can just like kind of describe what happens next and the importance of it to the listeners as well.
Okay, well, I'll talk about this scene, and then I'll give a little bit of a comment on what you said about the live action for the action in the at the beginning of the episode. But basically, I mean, anybody that's been watching this has noticed. Well, I mean, anybody who pays a keen eye to animation and maybe a lover of martial arts has noticed that this, like everything in Bebop, has a purpose, and it's all been written in a particular way. So, for example, if you pretty much see this character as purple, give or take, this character is going to be purple. Nothing's going to pop up and try and just be made up just for the sake of an episode. So one of the things about Spike is that Spike participates in a martial arts called Jeet Kune Do, and it's kind of like a constant. Like you see the way how when he fights, his stances, the way how he throws a punch, throws a kick, and the way how he maneuvers like a boxer, but then he fights with the legs of a kickboxer, and then throws punches with the hands of like a traditional boxer or some Wing Chun. And basically, I mean, the martial art of Jeet Kune Do was created by the late great master Bruce Lee, who actually passed away this year. It was 78 years ago now. He passed away 78 years ago on November the 27th. So that was yesterday. And he basically created his own martial art. And
he would have been 78 this year. He did pass away 78 years ago. He would have been 78.
It would have been 78. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Apologies to any Bruce Lee listeners out there, because I know you guys are as bad as the Beehive on Twitter. So yes, it was just a mistake. And basically his philosophy he decided to approach a much more Zen-like attitude to martial arts, which he felt had basically kind of been lost, where certain traditions or certain styles were being brought to the West and were obviously just being used to create money. And he basically created his own style and said, and took the philosophy of you are the best that you can be, and you should be able to adapt to anything. And Spike basically gives Rocco this whole speech about how you can be water, and how you should be, you shouldn't really have to be tensed up. You should be able to flow and adapt to anything, whether it be in life, whether it be in fighting, which is basically the philosophy of Bruce Lee. And if you speak to a lot of martial artists now, there's quite an adaptability to how they deal with things. They're not violent people. They're quite patient. And they just live life from day to day. One of our friends who's actually been on Wulong Talks before, Emmanuel, he may kill me for saying this, but I believe he has a very, very Zen-like approach to life, and it is through his martial arts and other styles of movement that he does. But this whole thing where Spike has just given a speech to Rocco, and he basically teaches Rocco uses him as a dummy to actually do the move, which is basically I think it's like an overhand throw. So when someone tries to attack you with a knife, you use their own momentum and weight against them, and you basically flip them over and they land on their back. But then as Spike is explaining as to the reason why this move works and why the martial art that he uses works, it's almost like he's describing himself and how he himself treats life in general. I don't know if you got that, Jay. Did you get that when he was giving that speech to Rocco?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
And it's almost like when Spike meets Rocco, as much as he's like a grumpy old man, and Spike isn't even that old, Spike is 27, and Rocco looks like he could be like a couple of years younger, there is almost like it's almost like Spike sees this innocence in Rocco, and he genuinely believes that he's not a bad guy. Otherwise, he would have kicked his ass a long time ago. But in seeing this goodness in him, it almost gives Spike a little bit of happiness, which we haven't seen in quite some time. I don't know if you'd agree with that as well, Jay. Like as much as he doesn't want to help Rocco first, when he does take him on, it's almost like no, this is something different to my life. This is nice. That's what I felt when I had when Spike was basically giving that martial arts demonstration, and also describing basically how Rocco should fight and should treat martial arts. It was just, to me, it was just him just describing how he lives his life since he left the Red Dragon Syndicate.
And also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that he pretty much kind of paraphrases a very famous Bruce Lee quotation from that
That
interview
water.
that Bruce Lee did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've forgotten what channel it was that Bruce Lee was being interviewed on. I can't remember now, but it's where Bruce Lee kind of explains his philosophy behind Jeet Kune Do and the idea that it's fluid like water, and that water can take on many forms. It can be harsh, it can be gentle, it can give life, it can take life away. So be water, my friend, is the famous line that Bruce Lee says when he's describing how he believes people should live their lives. And I think, as I said, Spike pretty much I don't think it's word for word quote, but he certainly paraphrases a lot of that when he's explaining to Rocco about his view on martial arts. And then, as Rich said, it kind of gives you an insight into Spike as well, into how he kind of views his life, and it explains a bit of why he has almost this kind of melancholic attitude towards certain scenarios that he's presented with. He doesn't seem to kind of react in the way that a typical person would normally react in certain situations that they're put in. So the scene itself, even though it's played for a bit of fun in sense that it's Spike trying to show Rocco martial arts, there's actually a lot more going on in the scene, and it's moments like that remind you just how genius this show is, and how genius the writers were of this show, and how they how brilliant they were at explaining such important parts of character storylines and important things that they were trying to say in such simple terms, and doing it in such a fun way as well. So that was pretty cool. But as Rich said, they go outside of the airport, and Spike is trying to teach Rocco these moves, and Rocco's not quite getting it really. And then a couple of bad guys show up, and Rocco panics and he runs off. But before he leaves, he gives Spike the package to hold on to, and he arranges to meet Spike the next day. Now we go back to the Bebop at this point. And Jet is complaining to Spike about Faye heading off to the casino and doing whatever she's doing, and as he usually does. Like at this point, as I said, at this point in the story, listeners, you got to consider Jet like Mama Bear of the Bebop. So he is just kind of whinging and doing what he usually does, and caring a hell of a lot. To be fair, that's what it is with Jet. It's partly kind of grumpy old man, but partly because he obviously cares a great deal about the crew. That's his family, so he's having a whinge about Faye running off and not bothering to check in with base and things like that. And whilst they're doing that, he's been researching the next bounty, and the next bounty turns out to be a guy called Picaro Calvino, who has his own crew. He's a gangster, and his crew have stolen this plant, which is called Grey Ash. Now, the plant itself will actually play a role later on in the story. So it said this is, the episode MacGuffin. This is the thing that kind of drives the story on. And Jet kind of realizes that the plant is worth quite a lot of wulongs and is used in kind of medicine. It's used to cure a specific disease, in fact, something called venous sickness. And one of the symptoms of venous sickness is blindness. So people actually lose their sight when they contract this condition when they've been on Venus. Faye, by the way, returns at this point, and she's kind of being Faye is like, yeah, let's sell it and try and make some money, which Jet is not having any of. So instead, they decide they're going to try and find Picaro Calvino. And Spike also leaves at this point as well. He heads off into the desert, which is where he'd planned to meet with Rocco earlier in the episode. And then when Spike actually gets to Venus, he lands there and he's searching around this kind of, I guess it's like an old spaceship, a disused shuttle or something like that. I think maybe, something like that. And while he's kind of investigating it, this woman comes out from the shadows and holds a gun at him. And then we get the traditional episode break. And at that point, I mean, like because I think I should probably mention that this is probably the first time in the series that we've actually gone to Venus. And I love visually kind of what they've done with Venus in the series, because it's got a number of different influences, to me anyway, to, you know, my untrained eye. It looks a lot like parts of North Africa. Anybody who's listening who's been to, you know, places like Morocco or Tunisia or Egypt, it has that same kind of feel in that it's there's a lot of desert landscape around, but there's lush green areas as well. The buildings, you know, it seems to me like they've styled a lot of the buildings in Venus around the kind of architecture that you would find in that part of Africa quite commonly. And the streets are very narrow and are all cobbled and are all ancient. And I just love that because, you know, for me, partly I'm a bit of a history geek, listeners, and I love kind of exploring, you know, old areas like that, and seeing that in the episode, it just took me straight back to that part of the world and being there and seeing those parts of it, you know. So that I really loved. I thought was a really, really nice touch. After that, now we get back from the episode break. Spike kind of holds up his hands and says to the woman, "Look, I'm not a criminal." But the woman kind of sort of stumbles and falls over, and Spike catches her. He explains that he's looking for Rocco, and the woman immediately becomes happy, and she explains that she's Rocco's sister called Stella. Spike finds out that she's got the Venus sickness and she's gone completely blind. During that kind of scene, they kind of sit at a wall and they're drinking like tea from North African tea glasses. For those of you that don't know what they're like, they kind of come from that part of the world, and they're very small. If you think of a teacup, it's about, you know, maybe half the size of a mug or something like that, and it's all made of glass. It usually has an ornate handle and then maybe a strip of metal towards the middle. And usually that's what you have your traditional tea in, which is usually quite sweet, and sometimes is flavored as well. Like sometimes, I mean, anybody who's been to Turkey or somewhere like that, and you've had Turkish tea is very similar. Same type of thing and served in the same kind of way as well. So that's what they're drinking at the time. And I'm sorry if these are silly little details, but I just love all this kind of stuff. So yeah, they're sharing a tea, and then Spike is conversing with Stella, and then obviously discovers about her condition and things like that. And it turns out that the plant that they have their hands on, that Spike has his hands on, the grey ash plant, has seeds inside it, which, as said, can be used to cure Venus sickness. So Rocco had actually stolen this plant from the gangsters in order to get it for his sister, so he could, you know, cure her blindness and things like that. Now, there's quite a funny scene as well in the bathroom, although it's funny, but it's kind of a bit dark. So I'll let Rich kind of explain it. But Rich, I'm thinking of when Rocco gets caught out in the bathroom.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it kind of reminds, like, is one of the things that I've noticed in this episode, and how there's almost like some the physical parts of this episode are quite funny. So like I mean, like, so for, like, it's almost like a comedy of errors. So at the beginning, when you're talking about when Spike is sleeping and a guy tries to attack him, and he stands up and he headbutts him, and it almost looks like an accident. And then basically, like, you know, then at one point he goes to stretch out his arms as if he's yawning, and then he punches the two guys by accident as well. And then you've got the whole clumsiness of like Rocco when he's trying to do the martial arts. And then basically, you know, then you've got this part of the episode where, I mean, like, Rocco's literally just in the toilet, just peeing. And he's there just, you know, just living his best life. He, you know, he may have been holding it for like an hour or something, I don't know. And he just, and he turns to his left, and he basically sees the guys that are after him, or at least one of them. And it's one of those things where it's like he looks and it doesn't even clock on at first. He's just weird, and he just stares at him, and there's just this shock in his face, and then it kind of like shows this over his shoulder shot, where he's staring into the camera, and behind him you see two other guys from the gang come out, and then he hears their voices, and he's just like, oh shit! You could just see in his face like just breaking it. Right now he doesn't want to be peeing; he wants to be doing the other thing, right? And then coming in through the entrance are two other members of the group. And they basically just tell him, be like, hey, boss, I can't find this guy anywhere. And Rocco just stands there, like, oh, hey, guys. And then the next scene is basically them just interrogating him. But it's the comedic timing in the scene, which is actually quite, if you think about it, like these guys are looking to kill him, if anything. But in how he gets caught, it's just, like I said, it reminds me a bit of like Comedy of Errors, where, you've just got something just belatedly happening in front of you, and nobody's aware of it apart from one person, and that's your insight into the joke. And it's like I said, like this show is just so well written.
And then actually after the scene that Richard describes, as he said, there's the torture sequence, and again, we hammer this home probably every episode of this podcast that we do. But seriously, listeners, like this is a show that will give you humor 1 minute and then give you bad shit the next. Because literally immediately afterwards, he's getting beaten up like to all hell by these guys. I think the boss even burns him with a cigar or something like that in his face. And it's like, oh man, like that's kind of, like it's kind of crazy how it will veer so quickly between comedy and violence in the show, but it never kind of jars. That's one of the skills that they have with this series, and it's one of the things they've done so well is that it never feels jarring. It doesn't feel like that was just a weird left turn to take. It feels almost like life, because as you said, there's these comedy of errors that occur where there's some fun in it, but things can take a dark turn at any time. And that's precisely what happens in this case. So, the Salvino's gang are torturing Rocco and trying to force him to tell them where he's stashed this grey ash plant that they've stolen. And eventually, after they threaten to attack his sister, he agrees to kind of lead them to the plant and basically to Spike. So at this point, whilst Rocco is doing that, Faye makes it to the meeting place in her hotel. No, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. She goes to try and track down Spike. She gets a lead as to where the gang are. She goes to try and find the gang, but then she finds out that the lead is no good. And then she manages to get in touch with Spike and heads off to try and join him. Jet also kind of is out there as well and heads off with her. At this point, Rocco manages to lead the gang towards Spike. A big fight breaks out. There's a massive shootout, which is done like really, really well. Again, with Cowboy Bebop, they just always manage to do these things so well. And the shootout is just, it's pitch perfect in terms of the way that it's staged, it's drawn, it's written, everything. And then during the shootout, there's this brilliant moment where one of the gang members comes out to confront Rocco, and and Rocco, bless his heart, tries to put Spike's training into practice and actually manages to use Spike's kind of fluid style to evade this goon and to knock him on the ground. And then Rocco says, "Spike, I did it. Look, Spike." Like a kind of, I don't know, like a 12-year-old kid who's just really impressed with like their macaroni picture that they did or something, and they're just like, look at me, look what I did. So Rocco's really pleased as punch with himself that he's managed to pull off this maneuver, and Spike kind of gives him a thumbs up as if to say, "Yeah, well done." And it's like, "Yeah, but you're in the middle of a shootout, mate. This probably isn't the time to be doing this." And then next thing you know, Rocco gets shot. And it's like, I kind of forgot that happens. I don't know why I'd forgotten, but I forgot. And when it did, it kind of hurt me a little bit. I was like, oh, shit. Like, Rocco's just got shot, man. Like, you know, he was trying to get the plant to help his sister. Like, this is bad, man. This is bad, you know? And I don't know how you felt. I mean, how did you feel about it when he got shot?
Well, the thing is, it's like you said, like he basically does the move that's got him to, you know, wanting to follow Spike and Spike become his master. And then you've got that whole thing where he sounds like a 5-year-old kid. But it's when the shot comes, like if you watch it, I'm literally watching it now with no volume, it's the look in his face. Because he's got this big smile in his face, and then the bullet just goes and goes through the back and out the front. And it's the lifelessness or like the shock to his body that you see in his eyes. That the animation on this show is actually just sometimes is too much on point. But yeah, but the same thing, like it makes you sad. It gets you in the feels. Especially because, you know, like you said, like there's a happiness that Spike has in this episode that you don't really get in the other episodes. Like, you know, even like, you know, when he puts his thumbs up and he smile, like, yeah, like, well done. There's just something about it where these two people are just completely happy in the middle of a freaking gunfight. You know, it's like there was some form of like fate or destiny that they're meant to meet. And also that bit when because where they're fighting actually reminds me a bit of a Colosseum.
Yes, it does.
I don't know, it reminds me of the end of Enter the Dragon, where they basically end up having the two battles between the good ninjas or the good martial artists versus the bad martial artists. And then at the end, when the battle's actually done, and Jim Roper, played by Jim Saxon, looks at Bruce Lee and nods his head, and Bruce Lee sticks his thumb up, and that's how the film ends. And it's something that about that scene that just reminds me of that. Yeah, just reminds me of, like, you know, this common theme once again of like Bruce Lee being a mentor to Spike without obviously throwing that out there. Like, obviously they never met, but he follows the philosophies of, you know, of Bruce Lee as a personality. And then you've got, you know, a scene which kind of reminds you of like what basically the film that made Bruce Lee a worldwide superstar, you know, in Enter the Dragon. So it's just those similarities, but yeah, like, you know, it's that scene. It's heart tugging, man. Like it really pulls the strings.
Like you said, it gets you in the feels. But I mean, listeners, as you know by now, man, like as Richard keeps saying, he said it from day one when we started this podcast, and he said it ever since. Like, don't let your guard down with Cowboy Bebop, because just when you think like everything is going to be okay and it's going to be jolly and everything's going to be fine, they'll pull the rug out from underneath you, and they'll make you, make you feel some feels. So, yeah, man, like that. Don't ever let your guard down. So Rocco gets hit in the back, as Rich said, and he falls down, and you hit the nail on the head, Rich. It's the shock on his face.
Yeah.
Shot that makes it that's what gets to you, because, you know, 1 minute he's over the moon at his achievement, and the next minute it's almost like he's saying, no, I can't die now. Like, you know, I've just had my greatest moment. Like, how can I die? You know? And yeah, it said it really does kind of hit you. So all credit due to the animators for that one. Anyway, so the fight continues, and then Faye arrives on the scene with the red tail. She just starts wetting up everybody, as Faye does, and it's brilliant because she just blows the shit out of all of the bad guys pretty much. And Spike tries to go over to Rocco to try and save him, but he realizes he can't really do anything. Although Rocco has that line at the end just before he dies as well, where he says, you know, I wonder if we'd met each other, you know, under different circumstances, would we have been friends? And I don't think Spike answers him, but you can kind of see by the look on Spike's face, he would have said yes, you know, or the answer would have been yes, that they would have done. Because as you said, Rich, you know, in this whole episode, this is the only time, certainly so far, that we've really seen Spike happy or even hints at happiness. That, you know, he generally doesn't show any happiness at all in the series so far. But at this point, you know, he looks kind of happy and he looks crestfallen at Rocco dying. So yeah, that was tough. But the crew round up the bad guys or take them out. And then after that scene ends, we get another scene where Spike goes to visit Stella at the hospital, who's Rocco's sister, and she's about to go for surgery to repair her eyesight. She kind of believes that, you know, it's Rocco who's arranged the operation for her, and that he's going to come and visit her. And then, you know, Spike is the one who kind of has to break the news to her that Rocco's not there. And there was, sorry?
It's how it's done. It's how he has to tell
Yeah.
That's really heartbreaking there, man.
Well, I think in that scene, because she, the way that it's done is that he really doesn't say much at all, Spike. It's very few words that you actually hear him say. It's mostly Stella doing the talking. And then, you know, she says, I think there's something wrong or something like that, she says to Spike. And no, sorry. She goes, oh, so did Rocco get himself in trouble again? And he's like, no. And then she's like, oh, is Rocco not coming back? And then Spike just kind of pulls up the chair and then comes closer to her. And then she's like, can I touch your face? And then she's like, starts touching his face. And then from the expression on his face, she can read that, you know, something terrible has happened. Which again is really kind of really well done, really well done by the animators, because it's such an emotional scene that's actually carries a lot of weight and a lot of resonance, and it's done really well. She asked Spike what Rocco was really like, and Spike says, you know, that she knows better than anyone that he was a terrific guy. And yeah, that's kind of where it ends, really. I mean, there's a really nice shot at the end as well, where Spike kind of goes to a fruit stand in a square, and he buys an apple, and as he goes away and takes a bite, the spores that kind of caused the blindness for Stella kind of begin to fall away from the apple like snow. And I guess that's kind of signifying, you know, the blindness leaving Stella and her regaining her sight. And that's it, really. That's where the episode kind of ends. But yeah, Rich, sorry, I know you wanted to come in a little bit on that final scene between Stella and Spike. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how that impacted you, did that feel like a really good conclusion to this episode and to what it was about?
Yeah, it just once again, it's like it just throws you on a big 180 and just makes you sad, because once, you know, I'm going to keep on saying this, the writing on this show is perfect. When Spike first meets Stella, and Stella's telling, explaining to Spike how she became blind because of the Venus sickness or Venus syndrome or whatever, I can't remember what it's called. But the one thing she says, she basically says, I don't mind being like this, but Rocco wants me to get better. Like, basically, like they've they basically curbed the actual sickness itself. It's just the blindness that she's suffering from. And so this whole thing where, Spike comes in to tell her and doesn't actually say it. And she touches his face. And she's got this whole thing where, when she first meets Spike, and she's like, I can tell you're a good person. That's why I'm sharing my tea with you. Like the same thing. Rocco is, Rocco's a good guy. People may say bad things about him, but I can feel it. I know good from bad. And all Rocco wants to do is just do this one good thing for his sister, which is basically give her her sight back. And she doesn't need it. That's the sad thing. That's like the bittersweet symphony of this episode, is that she actually doesn't need it. And I'm not saying it's her fault that that Rocco gets killed, but it's the goodness in Rocco that she can see, that we kind of see, in wanting to have her to have the best, best thing ever. But she actually doesn't need it. But he just wants to give her the best because he's a good person. And there's bits and pieces throughout this whole episode where when Spike is kind of talking to himself, and it's almost like he's trying to remind himself that, like, yeah, I can't be happy. Happiness isn't a thing for me. Like, the bit when he, just after he leaves Rocco the first time, and Rocco says something about, oh, I'm so happy, or like, something about, you've got good energy or something like that, or try and keep your spirit high. And Spike kind of mumbles to himself like, what? I gave that up years ago. And then the bit when he's talking to Stella when he first meets her and they're sharing tea, and you can kind of see him like loosening up. And then he realizes that Rocco has kind of got into like bad stead with some bad guys, by the way how Stella describes the situation. And he kind of falls back into that mode where he's like, I've met nice people, but I'm gonna have to go out and do bad things again. You know, like there's that bit where he's looking out the window, just staring, and he's like, yeah, I used to be good. I used to be happy. But I think those times are past me. And then when you come to the third act of the show where, you know, the one person who's kind of made him feel like this in quite some time, he sees the happiness in his face, and that reflects back onto Spike, and Spike feels happy, he throws a thumbs up. Then you get, Rocco gets killed, and then come by the end of the episode when he goes to speak to Stella, it's almost like, it's what Stan Lee used to do with Spider-Man. Spider-Man would have like a whole issue of just fighting just bad stuff, and he's fighting, that whole thing, like, oh my god, I can't defeat Scorpion, Green Goblin, and the Sandman while Aunt May's in hospital, and I've got to be at this date with Mary Jane Watson while cheating on her with Gwen Stacy. Like, and at the end of the episode, like nothing goes his way apart from that he beats everybody, but he takes a few knocks and bruises, and that's what you get from Spike, where once again this whole philosophy that he had to explain to Rocco about, you need to be water, you need to be formless, you need to flow, and you need to be ready to deal with whatever. Spike goes back into that mode from happiness, going straight back into that whole thing of like, well, in this situation, I know how I need to be because this is what I am, and it's just sad, like that whole bit when he's walking through, like you said, and you see like the little petals falling down, and it's just it's a running motif throughout the show that we've mentioned before. Like Cowboy Bebop is a show about moments between people that if you don't know them, they're nothing because they're just, they're like leaves in the wind, like what you see at the end dropping. But if you do know them, at least that for some point you're going to be involved in, in a little adventure, or like, whether it's on the Venus or whether it's on Earth. But it's that ending scene where the petals drop, that just once again just tells you what this whole show is about and what this episode's about. Like, people come and people go, just like leaves in the wind.
Yeah, man. Well said. Well said. All right, listeners. Well, let's look into some of the background and the themes and the homages and all kinds of things going on in the episode. And there's quite a few in this one. So for this, we're going to head over to our trusty old friend Bebopopedia. This is a wiki website for all things Cowboy Bebop. So if you're a fan of Cowboy Bebop and you want to learn a few different things about the episodes and what goes on kind of behind the scenes and things like that, then definitely check out Bebopopedia. Okay, so diving straight in for some of the themes and the motifs in this episode. So a common one, yes, is Spike just having a very liberal view with regards to no smoking being allowed in certain places. That's something that Spike does continuously throughout the entire series. Everywhere he goes where there's no smoking, he's always got a cigarette in his mouth. So yeah, that's a constant thing that Spike does. We talked a little bit in this episode about Faye and her gambling. After collecting her share of the bounty, Faye goes off to a casino to try her luck at some quick cash. Throughout the series, Faye's gambling addiction becomes a central part of her character, which it does, actually. So yeah, that's something that's going to play out a lot later on in the series, listeners. So that's worth checking out as well. Something I forgot to mention in the episode description, actually, the music box. There's a music box that Rocco gives to Stella, which she shows to Spike when they're talking. And it's an old-fashioned music box. So it's a typical kind of wind-up, music box. If you know the type, it's like the antique design where the top pops off and then the little ballerina comes up and then it plays a tune. Apparently, this also appears in a couple of the later episodes that we're going to be looking at in this podcast as well. So we'll have to look out for that, Rich. But yeah, apparently the music box is a common thing.
Okay.
So some of the homages and references are that there's a Tom and Jerry parody movie that people are watching on as the in-flight movie on board the Venus shuttle at the beginning. Huey, Dewey, and Louie, well, you should know who they are, but for those of you who don't, That's the name of Donald Duck's three nephews. If you ever watched the Disney cartoon DuckTales, then you know who Huey, Dewey, and Louie are. Let's see what else is there. Oh, the scene where Rocco gets roughed up by Picaro and his gang bears a resemblance to a similar scenario in the neo-noir film Chinatown, in which the protagonist receives a beating and a cut on the nose by a gang leader and his henchmen in front of a chain-link fence. That's I didn't actually think of that at the time, but that makes sense. The episode is highly inspired by the 1951 noir film On Dangerous Ground. Both Stella and Rocco are inspired by the main character Rocco's death. Sorry, that's not a very well written sentence there, so let me break that down. Because I was just reading it word for word and it doesn't really make a lot of sense at all. But basically, it's based on this 1951 film noir movie. Film noir, kids, for those of you listening, that's like an old school movie genre that was very popular towards the end of the 40s and around the 50s and 60s. And there's still elements of film noir that you see in modern day thrillers today as well. But it was a name given by the cinema writers from French cinema in the 1960s to like a lot of American gangster movies and thrillers that came out in sort of the mid to late 50s. And the reason they called it film noir is because the stories were quite dark, but also visually the films were quite dark as well. They used a lot of car shadows and things like that. There was certain elements to each character that were pretty much kind of staples throughout the film noir subgenre as well. Ask your parents about the Maltese Falcon. That's probably one of the most famous examples of a film noir with Humphrey Bogart. Again, ask your parents. I could explain him, but yeah. What else is there here? So Spike's description of his fighting style being like water might suggest certain forms of Chinese martial arts such as Wing Chun or Tai Chi. It's also likely a reference to a quotation by Bruce Lee, who himself practiced Wing Chun. Well, as Richard quite eloquently explained earlier on, it's actually more a reference to Bruce Lee's own martial art and his philosophy, Jeet Kune Do. So, no, we got that right, you got that wrong. But they've actually put the quote down here as well, so that'll be interesting. So I'll just read that out for you listeners. So the full quote from Bruce Lee is, "You must be shapeless, formless, like water. When you pour water in a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and it can crash. Become like water, my friend." And lastly, some of the trivia. So, so they pointed this out as well. So where I was babbling on earlier about kind of some of the North African style to the architecture on Venus, in the trivia section here on Bebopopedia, they said Middle Eastern based architecture, dress and written language appear throughout the scenery of Venus alongside the bazaar where Turkish store names are seen. In the 14th minute of the session, the skyline of Venus is also shown with the architectural copy of the Sultan Ahmed Mosque of Istanbul, Turkey. All these details suggest that Venus has substantial Arab and Turkish populations. Which, that makes sense, actually, because I don't remember like looking at the background people so much, but I do remember that skyline shot, and actually, it does make sense that it would be based on that Turkish mosque. Listeners, you know what the mosque is. I mean, if you imagine Turkey and you imagine Istanbul, then the first thing that pops into your head will be that mosque. It's one of those kind of world famous things. It's like Big Ben, it's world famous. So as said, you can imagine in your mind's eye what that is. If not, you can always Google it. But basically, if you look at Venus, it looks pretty much like that, really. Interestingly, in another Watanabe anime, Samurai Champloo, a similar story is told. In the series' 7th episode, Surrounded on All Sides, a young man is forced to commit crimes in order to pay for a treatment that will heal his ill mother. Just like Rocco, however, he ends up being killed, leaving the ultimate fate of his relative unknown. So we had actually kind of talked about this when we watched this, and Rich, you remembered that this was very similar to the episode from Samurai Champloo, which, for those of you that don't know, is another terrific anime from Shinichiro Watanabe that we're hoping to do a podcast on once we get through Cowboy Bebop. But yeah, it seems you're right, Rich. So it's more or less the same, really, as that episode from Champloo. So yeah, that's interesting. And that is it, really, for the trivia and all of that. So we pretty much covered that there. So that hopefully gives you a bit of background behind the episode. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, hopefully you can go back and watch it with a few more of these things in your head, and it'll give you a more informed picture of kind of what you're seeing. But yeah, overall, as we said at the top, this is a pretty good episode. It's a fun episode, and yet, as said, with Cowboy Bebop, it has so many dark moments within it, and still manages to be fun. That's kind of what makes this show so amazing, is that it manages to be fun and engaging and exciting with this kind of undercurrent of depression running just underneath it that is going to poke its head up at any moment, and I think that's what makes the series so enduring and so beloved by the fans, really. And hopefully, if the live action adaptation that they're planning manages to capture even half of this, then they're doing the right thing, really, and they're going in the right direction. But Rich, did you have any final thoughts on this episode?
No, like I said, just like it's a one of my favorite episodes, and you did mention Samurai Champloo, saying that we might do it. No, listeners, when Bebop is done, Samurai Champloo is next. This episode is another fun episode, even though it's got its sad moments in it. But like we keep on saying, like Cowboy Bebop, each episode is just that keen reminder that life is life, and shit happens. There's a reason why they say see you space cowboy at the end of it, because you say that to someone if you're not sure if you are going to see them, and if you are going to see them, then something's going to happen. So yeah, I love this episode.
Yeah, definitely, man, definitely. Well, listeners, as said, you can let us know how you got on with the episode, and you can get in touch with us. We have a Facebook page that we're not doing a great job of updating, to be honest, but I am going to be doing some more stuff with the Facebook and our Instagram as well. If you want to know how to follow us on there, just look for the Bebop Rewatch on both of those apps, and you'll find us. As said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and post up like some trivia bits as well as like the normal stuff, because usually at the moment I'm just posting when episodes come out, but it'll be good to kind of get some more stuff up on there. So we'll try and throw up some more kind of trivia and some breaking news when that's coming out surrounding Bebop. We'll try and do some things with that as well. So if you want to follow us on the social medias, then go ahead and do that, as said, on facebook.com and on Instagram at the Bebop Rewatch. All right, well, we're going to wrap this one up, but before we go, we must say a big thank you to our friend Rob Wade and the guys over at emotionally14.com. This podcast is officially E14 endorsed. That means we are part of the Emotionally 14 network, and you can find loads more podcasts like this over at emotionally14.com. And also we are part of the Britpod Scene Collective as well, which is a collective of independent British podcasters. It's a lot of fun. There's podcasts for just about everything that you're into, so whatever you fancy, you'll find it there. Make sure you go and check those guys out as well at www.britpodscene.com. We'll have links up in the show notes for this as well, so if you check the show notes on your app, then you should be able to see some links to those websites. Make sure you go and check those guys out. But yeah, that's it for us. As said, the episode has come to an end, so thanks a lot for listening. Thanks for joining us. Next week we'll be diving into session 9, I believe it is, and it will be the introduction of one of my favorite characters from Cowboy Bebop. Well, they're all my favorite. I don't know why I say one of my favorites. They're all my favorite, but this is my other favorite. We'll be meeting finally Edward, and I cannot wait, because Edward just is just a ball of absolute energy energy, and I love it. So I can't wait for us to get into that episode and to describe what happens to you guys. So yeah, make sure you come back next week and we'll definitely be diving into that one. But for now, I'm gonna say goodnight. So it's goodnight from me. Rich, say goodnight.
See you, Space Cowboy.
Yeah, man. And take care of yourselves out there, people. We'll see you next week. Peace. Thanks for listening to us. If you're down with Wulong Talks, show some love by following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Wulong Talks. You can also find us online at www.wulongtalks.com or drop us an email at wulongtalkspodcast@gmail.com. We can also be found as part of the Britpod Scene Collective, and we're also officially E14 endorsed. Search for those hashtags to enjoy more content from us and from other great British podcasters.